This is the Bible Book Club. I'm Susan.
And I'm Heather.
And we're in the book of 2 Samuel. Welcome to the club.
Last episode in chapters 5 and 6 of 2 Samuel, so much was going on. It was kind of this eye for an eye thing that they were doing. Joab killed Abner. David cursed Joab. Baanah and Rekab killed Ish-Bosheth. David killed Baanah and Rekab. Despite all of this killing, David managed to unite the two kingdoms. And Israel is finally becoming that nation under David, a king after God's own heart. This event fulfilled prophecy from the past and pointed Israel toward the future prophecy of Jesus.
All right, in scene 1, this united nation gets a new capital.
Chapter 5. Verse 6, the king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They thought, David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. On that day, David had said, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies. That is why they say the blind and lame will not enter the palace. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the terraces inward.
It sounds a little confusing. Let me explain. David's first endeavor as king was to reclaim the city of Jerusalem. Now, the city was strategically located between Judah and the rest of Israel. And the city had been captured from the Canaanites way back in Judges 1. But somewhere along the way, Jerusalem was lost to the Jebusites. Now, the fortress upon the plateau of Mount Zion, which is in Jerusalem, had never, ever been occupied by the Israelites, and it rose 3,000 feet above sea level and was fortified with walls and towers. So it was kind of impregnable. That is why these Jebusites so confidently taunted David that he would never get in. But David had a plan to enter in an unusual way through a water shaft. Now, in a fascinating discovery, this hidden water source was found in 1867 by Sir Charles Warren. It's a sloping tunnel or vertical shaft that Joab and his men climbed up to enter the city and overcome the inhabitants. The fortress was then renamed the City of David. Now, David is strategically reuniting the fractured Israel into a new empire. For those interested in the lay of the land, we have 3 maps in the show notes from the Holman Bible Atlas, so you can kind of visualize this. One is a map of the city of David with the Temple Mount not yet built. No water shaft involved in that image, but try to picture it. One is a map of the land allotted to each of the 12 tribes. Remember, that's what we've been kind of working under. Each tribe had its own allotment. And the final map is a map of the 2 kingdoms that are now one. So you can kind of see the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and now they're all one under David. You can see on the last 2 maps how Jerusalem was located on the land of the tribe of Benjamin, which was King Saul's tribe. And this was a strategic move for David. The city was also located, you'll see, right in the middle of the 2 kingdoms. And at the time it was named the capital, it did not belong to either kingdom. It belonged to the Jebusites. Therefore, it was neutral ground and more readily accepted by both Ish-Bosheth's followers and David's followers. So, great move by David in choosing it. Added to all that, Jerusalem has some history with the most noble of patriarchs, Abraham himself. It was from Jerusalem that Melchizedek came to meet Abraham nearly 1,000 years earlier. And you can learn about the mysterious Melchizedek from season 1, episode 14. But the point was that Jerusalem was the perfect capital for David to choose. It was naturally easy to defend from atop a plateau. It was centrally located for all Israel, and it had a lack of attachment to any of the tribes of Israel. The city of Jerusalem is also even today, the most important city of the Bible. It is mentioned 800 times. And today, Jerusalem remains one of the most bitterly contested cities on earth. It has been the long-standing scene of violent confrontations between Jews and Arabs. And the old part of the city is a major religious site sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, which explains why it is such a place of conflict. All three of these major world religions share a common forefather, Abraham, and a passion for the city of Jerusalem.
Okay, I know you just went into that in very great detail, and I was tracking with you, but I have a question. So in the passage, before you explained it all, it called it Zion. So he's at this fortress at Zion. It also said that he named it the city of David, but you're calling it Jerusalem. So Zion, the city of David, and all Jerusalem are all the same thing.
All the same thing.
Got it.
Scene 2, David gets a palace.
Verse 10, and David became more and more powerful because the Lord Almighty was with him. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent envoys to David along with cedar logs and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. Then David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people, Israel. After he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem, and more sons and daughters were born to him. These are the names of the children born to him there: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliaphilet.
So David became more powerful for one reason. The Lord was with him. And after years of being chased in the wilderness by Saul and working for the enemy, the Philistines, just to survive, David can stop questioning and doubting whether he was to be the king that God planned. With God in control, David has arrived. To put a point on it, Hiram, the king of Tyre, a rich ally, builds David a palace. In the future, this same king will also help Solomon in the temple construction. But with a palace and this recognition from everyone, David knows that yes, all of God's plans will come to fruition. To the world, Israel has arrived. The country has a powerful king, a real capital, a fortress, and even a palace.
Can I just say, in the last episode, you had brought in a reminder for us of some of the warnings that Moses had given them about what this king should and shouldn't do. And here we already have, you kind of told us that he was going to take all these wives, but he's also, back in that passage, it said they shouldn't amass a bunch of silver and they shouldn't amass a big army, which is kind of also what he's doing here.
Yeah, it really never goes into his silver and gold, but yes, with power comes fame and followers and even riches, as you said, and another hint of future trouble. We learned in episode 2 that while in Hebron, David had 7 wives and 6 sons. Now, living in the capital, in a palace, the new king has taken more concubines and wives. Now, the use of the word concubines first in this passage is very unusual. Precedence dictates that the wives should have been listed first. It is thought that this is the author's discreet eye roll at David's weakness for women. Now, David's accumulation of women was a direct violation of Deuteronomy 17:17, which we've read before. It said,
"He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray."
With David's rise to power, many countries and tribes would have sought political alliances with him. And during this day, that meant gifts and strategic marriages. Now, the gifts could be beautiful women or concubines, and maybe that's why he acquired so many. And the marriages would have been with the daughters of kings for strategic alliance. David could have refused such gifts. Clearly, he did not refuse all of them. And that leaves the door open for David, the man after God's heart, to allow his own heart to be led astray. Scene 3, the Philistines are at it again. David's history with the Philistines really never seems to end. He has been a threat to the Philistines since he killed Goliath as a young boy. He has killed hundreds of the Philistines in battles for Saul and to win wives, etc., etc. He has tricked the Philistine leaders multiple times by pretending to be crazy and by pretending to protect them while he was living in Philistia. And now David has become the uniting leader of their greatest enemy, Israel. And the Philistines are not happy about it.
Now back to our story in 2 Samuel chapter 5. Verse 17. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. But David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" The Lord answered him, "Go, for I will surely deliver the Philistines into your hands." So David went to Baal-perazim, and there he defeated them. He said, "As waters break out, the Lord has broken out against my enemies before me." So that palace was called Baal-perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them off. Once more, the Philistines came up and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, and he answered, "Do not go straight up, but circle around behind them and attack them in front of the poplar trees. As soon as you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the poplar trees, move quickly, because that will mean the Lord has gone out in front of you to strike the Philistine army." So David did as the Lord commanded him, and he struck down the Philistines all the way from Gibeon to Gezer.
This scene describes two battles. Both take place in the valley of Rephaim. Now, the valley is named after a giant Philistine named Rapha. The Rephaim are his descendants. David is once again going up against a Philistine giant. Now, the valley is geographically pivotal because it was located on the border between Benjamin and Judah. If the Philistines won this battle, they would win the valley and it would cut David off from his new northern supporters, all Ish-Bosheth's people, which would give Saul's former followers a reason to reconsider their new allegiance to David. These battles were crucial for David because they both took place in that valley for the continued unification of Israel. David does not fail because David inquires of the Lord first, unlike Saul, who did not. And so God does not fail to give David this success. Now, in the first battle, the Lord promises to deliver the Philistines into David's hands. The Lord gives them success, and the Israelites carry off the Philistines' idol, just as the Philistines had carried off the Israelites' ark years ago in 1 Samuel 4, Season 9, Episode 3 and 4. Remember the 5 gold rats and the 5 gold tumors? This was a big deal because it was customary for victors of a battle to carry off the, air quotes, gods. We know the Philistines didn't have any real gods, but they thought they did. The gods of the defeated, because in ancient culture, it was the strength of the gods that won the battle, which is so important. We talked about last time, so they may know. This is why God wanted to give David success, so they may know. In the second battle, the Lord tells David to wait to attack until the sound of marching in the tops of the poplar trees. This was the sound of the army of the Lord advancing before them because that army was with David because he sought the Lord first. Both battles were monumental to the Israelites. Scene 4. Good intentions plus a bad move on David's part equal a fatal end. David is moving fast, and his leadership is impressive. He has secured the unity of the people. He has created a capital for the United Kingdom. And true to his heart for the Lord, his next move is to make Jerusalem Israel's center for worship. He's going to bring it all back to God. And that means he needs to move the ark. Chapter 6.
David again brought together all the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all his men went to Baalah in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Io, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals.
So David's intentions were really good here. He was a man after God's heart, and he wanted Israel to be a nation after God's heart. David, his palace, and the capital were all safely housed in a fortress in Jerusalem. The throne of God, the ark, should be there too, and David felt this deeply. So he gets together 30,000 men and plans a great celebration to bring the ark to Jerusalem. Well, where is that ark anyway? Let's go back a little bit. We just read how the Israelites jubilantly carried off the idols of the Philistines when they won the last two battles. This was particularly satisfying for the Israelites because in the beginning of 1 Samuel in chapter 4, the Philistines destroyed the tabernacle and carried off the ark of the Israelites. Now, when the Philistines captured the ark, God imposed plagues on the Philistines, forcing them to return the ark to Israel. However, when the ark arrived in Israel on a cart, the Israelites disrespectfully mishandled it, and 70 of them died. In 1 Samuel 7, the people summoned the men of Kiriath Jearim to take the ark away.
1 Samuel 7, verse 1. So the men of Kiriath Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on a hill and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the ark of the Lord. The ark remained in Kiriath Jearim a long time, 20 years in all.
So since the time when the Philistines returned the ark and 70 Israelites died, during the reign of Saul, who probably never again gave it a thought, the ark has been stuck at the home of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim. Now, the fact that the ark is in a home, not the tabernacle, not a temple, is deplorable. In Exodus 25, Season 2, Episode 18, God gave Moses specific instructions for the ark, the tabernacle, and all of the sacred objects inside the tabernacle. The details were specific, lengthy, and costly to build because the ark was sacred, and the tabernacle which housed the ark was a sacred space. But why were the tabernacle and the ark so important? Well, God explained this in Exodus 25.
The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart prompts them to give. These are the offerings you are to receive from them: gold, silver, and bronze, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen, goat hair, ram skins dyed red, and another type of durable leather, acacia wood, olive oil for the light spices, for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense, and onyx stones and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and breastpiece. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you."
Why was the tabernacle so precious? Because the purpose of the tabernacle was clear. It was a sacred place created so that God could dwell among them. The opening statement that Heather read was, "The Lord said to Moses," is the first of 7 statements that reflect the 7 days of creation. God was taking them back to a beginning of sorts. The other statement to note is that God said he will dwell among them. This was a first. God won't be like them, like he was in the garden. It will be different, but he would dwell among them. The design of the tabernacle points back to the garden, which was the only other place that God had ever been present with man, the place that all humanity wanted to get back to since the fall. Now, if you go back and read the descriptions of the tabernacle in Exodus 25 through 27, you will recall the words of creation in Genesis, because the design for the tabernacle mimicked the design of Eden. In Genesis, God's design was there was Eden. Within Eden, there was a garden. Within the garden, there was the tree of life. And in the tabernacle, God's design was there was a courtyard, and within the courtyard, there was a holy place, and within the holy place, there was the most holy place, which was a place of life, just like the tree of life. God tells Adam and Eve to work and take care of the garden in Genesis 2:15, and God tells the priest to work and take care of the tabernacle in Numbers 3. Then Adam and Eve disobey and are exiled from the garden. God placed cherubim to guard the way back into the garden and to the tree of life. And in Exodus, God tells Moses to place cherubim on the top of the ark to guard the seat of God in between them, because God is the way to life. There was so much symbolism wrapped up in the tabernacle, and the Philistines had destroyed it. It was a bitter pain point for David, and it will weigh heavily on him in the next episode. But the Israelites still had the ark, and David's desire was to bring it and the presence of God back to a place of honor in Israel. It should not be in someone's home. David's intentions are good, but not well thought out, and the lesson that follows is tragic.
Now back to our story in 2 Samuel chapter 6, continuing in verse 6. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore, God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah.
Poor Uzzah. He instinctively tried to protect the ark, but he failed to obey the law in the process. Uzzah, we learn in verse 3, was Abinadab's son. He was one of the leaders of this operation to move the ark, so he should have looked into the laws about how to care for the ark.
Was he a Levite? Because the Levites are the ones who are supposed to.
It's assumed. It doesn't clearly say, but he was with Abinadab, and he was Abinadab's son, and so it's kind of assumed.
Okay, so he should.
So he should have looked into the laws.
He would have known the law.
Yeah,
but at the very least, he should have looked into the law. Saying.
Because the last guys who touched the ark, 70 of them died. So I think it's still within their history. David's still alive. He was alive then and he's alive now. So ultimately, though, David should have known the law too. And if he had, the ark wouldn't have tipped, and Uzzah would have never been in danger of touching the ark. David should have known from the 70 men who died from his handling the ark before, and from the command in Deuteronomy 17, he should have known the law.
Deuteronomy 17, verse 18. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the Levitical priests. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees.
Had David known the law, he would have known that the ark should not have been moved in a cart, but with poles placed on the shoulders of men who carried it on foot as outlined in Exodus 25. David had not learned the proper way to handle the seat of the presence of the Lord. It was sacred, and the result was fatal. Uzzah instinctively reached out to steady the ark. But to touch the ark, God's throne, the epicenter of holiness, was fatal. Because we have sin, and sin and God do not intersect. And that is why we need a savior, an intermediary, a sacrifice to cover and atone for our sin. Now compare what happened to Uzzah, who touched the holiness of God in the Old Testament, to what happened to someone who touched the Son of God in the New Testament. Listen to Mark 6. I love this.
Mark 6, verse 56. And wherever he went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
When people touched the holiness of God in the Old Testament, they died. When people touched Jesus in the New Testament, they were healed. God had a plan to work all things together for our good from the time of David until the time of Christ, and his plan was always for us to be healed.
And that is a Bible bender for me. When people touched God in the Old Testament, they died, but when they touch Jesus in the New Testament, they live.
They are saved. I know. I love that too. All right, scene 5. The ark moves to the capital.
Verse 9. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household.
David justifiably is a little triggered, but David is not deterred. He took some time to be still. He waited a few months, and he must have read up on the book of the law. And he may have even consulted with the priests on the error of his ways, because his next attempt is successful. Now, note to us, God is a God of second chances. When we fail, it is not the end, but an opportunity to be still, read the word, pray, and consult godly people. Like David, we must know God's word to know God's way. And we can only know his word by reading his book. That's why in this podcast, we read every single word.
Now back to our story in 2 Samuel, chapter 6, continuing in verse 12. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." So David went to bring up the ark of God to the house of Obed-Edom, to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets.
David's second attempt to bring the ark to Jerusalem meets with success. It begins and ends with sacrifice, and no carts are involved. And the entire city rejoices, almost. There is one person who is not happy about it. Scene 6. Michal is back in town.
Verse 16. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart.
What does that mean? She despised him in her heart. So Michal peered through a window in the royal palace, and below a grand procession unfolded, accompanied by music and attended by a multitude of people. Many commenters believe that Michal had some of her father's proud temperament. Remember, her father was the former king Saul. She observed David leaping and dancing before the Lord, expressing his inner joy, and she was disgusted by his display because to her, his action seemed undignified and unworthy of his new royal status. I think there might be a little bit more to it.
Verse 17, they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. After he had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the whole crowd of Israelites, both men and women. And all the people went to their homes. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would."
Michal specifically mentions that he danced half naked in front of the slave girls. So before we judge this daughter of Saul, let's review her history. Michal is the daughter of a king, a woman raised in privilege. She was the second choice gift to David for defeating the Philistines by her father. Because remember, Saul originally offered his older daughter, Merab, in 1 Samuel 18, verse 17. But David declined, saying he was unworthy. Now, David ends up with Michal because Saul found out that Michal was in love with David. Now, we never know how David felt about her, but he did marry her for whatever reason. We learned in season 9, episode 11, that Michal protected David from Saul inside his home, while Jonathan protected him on the outside. Remember, Michal and Jonathan are siblings, so they're both protecting this man, David. So she did demonstrate her love and loyalty by risking her father's wrath and protecting her husband. Michal, like David and Jonathan, was also a victim of her deranged father, Saul, who took her from David as a punishment to David and gave her to another man. So she's got a lot going on here. She loves David, even when he was just a shepherd, and she protects him, even though her father got really mad at her. And then her father takes her away from her husband. So Michal then spends, we don't know how many years, but it could be as many, if not more than 20 years at the hands of another man. She's taken away from David and given to another man as his wife. Again, a lot of trauma and hurt here. Now, David is faithful to her because he asks for her back just a few chapters ago. Remember in his negotiations with Abner, she was his only added request to Abner in their deal when Abner switched sides and came to David, which, was very honorable and good of David that he still remembered her because he's got a lot of other wives. But what kind of life with David did poor Michal walk back into? I had, wrestled with this a little. I don't know that it might have been a good thing because David has married many other women in these, we don't know how many years, could be 20. Some of these women have been with him for many years and had sons with him, an honor that Michal should have had as his first wife. She should be the honored first wife in the royal household, but she's been missing for years. And so what was the hierarchy by this time? It was probably pretty well established. And the women with sons certainly would have held sway in the house. And how old is Michal now? She may be too old. So how can she compete for David's attention between wives, sons, and concubines? Because remember, we read that verse too, that he now has these young, beautiful concubines that were gifts to this powerful king, and they probably are going to continue pouring in. So what was Michal experiencing when she's taken back into this household? When she met David, he was young and he needed her. She loved him when he was an inexperienced nobody shepherd. And now he is dancing naked in front of every girl in town. And it's just possible that Michal was feeling like another man's used goods, feeling like a dead king's daughter, displaced, past childbearing years, possibly still in love with David, and probably jealous. Was this wrong? Yes. But before we judge her, I think it was very human.
And I'm glad you put it that way because I was kind of judging her.
Okay.
I'll try not to.
Well, I have to be honest. If you read the commentaries, they judge her too. But I just kind of feel for her. It's not a great situation.
Continuing in verse 21, David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death.
Okay, so sad. Now, in David's defense, he was not really naked. That was kind of a strong word she used. He had removed his royal clothing and was truly praising God with joy. He was not doing anything wrong. He chose to worship as a commoner, as one of the people, as himself, and not as a king. It was actually an act of humility, most commentaries think. And Michal, she may have loved David, but like her father, she had little regard for the ark and the presence of God. She was more focused on David and his actions than on the celebration and worship of the Lord in the moment. Therefore, she could not enter into the joy of the occasion. And for this reason, it appears that she remains childless. Now, with this pronouncement, it appears that every branch of Saul's family has come to an end, which it was prophesied that it would. Jonathan and Ish-Bosheth are dead. Mephibosheth is crippled, and Michal is barren.
What's a club without friends? If you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you can say, Welcome to the club. New episodes drop every Monday, and get all episodes now on Amazon Music. As always, head over to susanme.com/Bible Book Club for show notes from today's episode. Bible Book Club is hosted by Susan Merrill and Heather Rubio, edited by Buck Buchanan, produced by Haley Mawat.